This is Dr. Carroll, and this video is about checked and unchecked exceptions. Let me start off by giving a preview that we're going to be covering the throws keyword in this video. So now, checked and unchecked exceptions. So an exception is either a checked or an unchecked exception, as you probably already guessed. So let's first talk about checked exceptions. These are exceptions that you have to handle in your code. Now, by have to, I mean the compiler will enforce it. It will know it is a checked exception and say, hey, you did not properly handle it, so I'm not going to compile it. Therefore, you will never have a program that has a checked exception that's not properly handled. So instances of the exception class and several of its derived classes are what make up checked exceptions. So two options for code that throws a checked exception is, one, you can do what I demonstrated in another exception handling video, and that is receive it in a try-catch block. So we can catch, well, you have to catch the exception and it be called in a try block. Okay? The other way is to just pass it along and just have throws exception in the method that has the throw in it for the checked exception. And where you put the throws exception is right before the method's opening brace. And I'll show you an example in a minute. So that is checked exceptions. You have to handle them in your code. The compiler enforces it. Now let's talk about unchecked exceptions. And these are ones that are just generally ignored. And so these are objects of runtime exception or one of its derived classes. So I'm saying, well, what can we generally ignore, or that's what we commonly do? Well, some examples are arithmetic exception, class cast exception, IO error, illegal argument exception, index out of bounds exception, null pointer exception, among others. But these are the most common ones. And so the arithmetic exception, what it is this is a math exception. So an example would be an integer division by 0. The computer says, I don't know how to do that, I'm going to throw an exception. So a class cast exception is when you're trying to cast an object in a way that just isn't going to work. For example, you're trying to cast a string to a double, and by explicitly casting it, and that's not the right way to do it. And it's going to say, hey, I can't do that. An IO error is an input-output error, as the name suggests. And so we're talking disk, network, and other things. So example would be you've opened a file, you've closed it, and now you're trying to read from a closed file. Watch for my video on file IO. Okay, more about that. A legal argument exception is, well, the argument can compile, but it isn't right. And so, like, for example, if you're passing a negative integer when only positive ones make sense, then the method might say, illegal argument exception, and throw that and say, I don't know what to do with this, and throw that exception. Index out of bounds exception. So you're going beyond the array length, and it says, I don't know what to do. It throws this exception, and so you've got to be careful of that. Or null pointer exception. You're accessing a null. You're using a null reference. You're calling a method on it or other things like that. And you can't do that because the reference doesn't point to anywhere in memory, and so the JVM says, I don't know what to do with this, and throws that exception. So let's see an example. So let's take the get number example simple with exceptions, and let's save it as 2 here. We're just going to move some code around to illustrate this. And so what we're going to do here is let's take the loop out of get positive int and let's put it right here. Let's put the loop around here to be able to get that positive int. And so we'll leave the error checking here. And so it's true. So here's our false condition. Let's catch it, and while we don't need this scanner, let's indent. Uh-oh, my indentation's off. Where'd it get off? Oh yes, the key part. Forgot to copy down try. All right, so all I've done is move around code. I've put the loop around here. We're gonna try to get a positive int here, calling it, and if it doesn't work, we're gonna catch, and we're gonna catch for all of these things. This one's a little crazy, so let's just, input mismatch exception, that could be thrown, or that whatever exception, whatever it is, it means we are unsuccessful. And so I'm sorry, we need to put that there. We default to unsuccessful as true. And so if we are able to get this, if this returns and assigns it to age, we say we're done, we can stop this loop, and we can move on, and we can move on to our flattery. Okay, so let's save that. Let's compile it. All right, it compiles. So what's going on here? It's compiling. So we talked about this throwing an exception earlier. So it throws an input mismatch exception, which is a derived class from a runtime exception. And so therefore it's an unchecked exception. Now notice we have this code here. We just apologize to the user that you entered a negative integer, whereas really what would be better is we throw an exception, because we want it, it's a big deal. We want it to be recognized that it's a big deal and taken care of. So now we're gonna have two exceptions that could be thrown. One is an input mismatch error, and the other one is an exception error. And we're just, notice this is common. We are creating an anonymous one. We're not saving it to a variable and then throwing it. We are just throw new exception. We could have saved it as our negative integer exception and then thrown that, but there's really no point. We're just going to create it, throw it, and then this method is done. It will stop executing, and we'll do that. So now we compile it. It says, hold on here a second. On error, unreported exception, whereas the capital exception is the class, must be caught or thrown, or declared to be thrown. So what's going on here? You either have to throw an exception in a try block, or we have to specify here before the curly brace that it throws, not throw, but throws, and then what it is you're throwing, in this case an exception. So now as we compile, it's happy, and now it'll work, and we can give it a negative number and it will throw the exception but will catch it. So if we say negative 19, it says error, negative integer, and then we go back through the loop again. We say enter your age, and there we go. A little bit of flattery for infant. That's, oh, I thought you were older than that. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it.